Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nilesh and as I'm sure you all know, our country is currently in a whole lot of debt. Now, according to numbers from the Federal Reserve and Treasury Department, compiled by USDebtClock.org, that number is currently at $60 trillion. Now, as the government sits around, they're currently trying to figure out ways to cut certain programs in order to balance the budget and possibly add other programs that might help our economy. And it is my contention that there should be one program in particular at the top of the chopping block. I believe that drug enforcement, as practiced by the US government, is an unnecessary drain on our government's already strained resources. Now, I believe this because it is both extremely expensive and has proven to be rather ineffective. Now, as for my first point that it's expensive, one has to simply look at the numbers. According to the New York Times article, the government spends approximately $40 billion a year, both federally and in state and local governments, in drug enforcement, on drug enforcement. This is not to mention the costs accrued by then having to incarcerate these offenders, which is approximately $35,000 a year per prisoner. Now, the costs are also not completely monetary, but also are accrued in other ways, such as the bad things that happen socially, such as violence, and that is practiced by, I don't want to call them fiends, however, dope users, people who are addicted to the drug, they're forced, because of its illegality, they are on the streets and are forced into very dangerous situations. That kind of increases the percentage of violence. Now, as for my second point that it's ineffective, I will first go to an example from our own government. As I'm sure many of you know, the 18th Amendment was instituted in 1920 and instituted the prohibition of alcohol. Now, that turned out to be rather costly for the US government and also very ineffective. No one really stopped drinking. In fact, 30,000 new bars, according to History.com, the runner of the History Channel, says 30,000 new speakeasies or bars were opened in NYC during Prohibition time. So clearly, this didn't really stop anything. Not only that, but organized crime was also greatly strengthened. I'm sure many of you have heard of Al Capone. He was making approximately $60 million a year, completely untaxed, purely through bootlegging of alcohol. We quickly learned from our mistake, and the US government instituted the 21st Amendment in 1933, abolishing the prohibition. Now, from this, I don't know why we haven't learned that this does not work and have continued to prohibit other drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. Now, while some may say that these harder drugs such as cocaine may cause violence, one also might say that the drug that causes the most violence is alcohol, and that is completely, that's widely available to anyone over the age of 21. Another example of the ineffectiveness of our drug war is proven in the use of drugs in our own country. The drug rates in the past 10 years have risen approximately 3.1%, from a total of 12,000 drug users to 22,622 drug users. This number is from the White House itself, and they put out a report yearly on drugs and the use rates in the country. Now, compared to other countries, such as the Netherlands, who have a lot laxer drug policies, you might expect them to have higher drug rates. However, in fact, we, as the United States, are one of the countries with the highest use of drugs. Also, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Total lifetime illicit drug use in the U.S. is approximately 36%, while in the Netherlands it's at about 29%. As well as even in our adolescence, the use of cannabis, the most widely drug used both here and in the Netherlands, as many of you I'm sure have heard of Amsterdam, a place that's widely known for its legal cannabis smoking. The U.S. has an age range from 13 to 18, about 43.7 cannabis smokers, while Netherlands has only about 17.7. Now, as I hope you have all seen through the evidence that I've provided, drug use is rather prevalent in the U.S., and the measures being taken by our government do not seem to stop it. However, these measures are highly costly, and we are currently out of money. So I hope you will all agree with me in my proposition that we should end the war on drugs. Thank you.
Well, the opening talks about trillions of dollars in debt, and then you basically have very little to do with that as your attention device. Again, the cost issue is the minimum point that you talk about on drug issues. It seems like there are other issues that take up most of your time, and none of it comes back to the debt issue. So I think that it might be a little bit confusing to use that as your attention device unless you're going to spend more time on that point. There's not really a layout of what the secondary structure is going to be, and I think it needs to be a lot sharper in order for us to be able to follow the arguments. Information sometimes gets signposted in the body of the speech, and I thought that you did that on your first internal point, but after that, it didn't seem like it did much more than wander around on the subject, making random observations and comparisons, and I think you need to be a little bit more focused on your structure. There's probably a structure here, but it's not one that's easily detectable, and you want to help the listener to be able to pick out the arguments so they can tell whether or not adequate proof has been offered for those arguments, and they can accept your conclusions. The claims about the problems for drug enforcement are I think, a little bit underdeveloped. You presented some statistics that were kind of confusing. You mentioned like a 3% increase in the number of drug users, and so we've gone from like 12,000 to 12,900 or so. I mean, you had some number like that, and I go, that doesn't sound right. That sounds to me like that's in LA County, maybe, not nationwide. Well, even then, 22,000, that still sounds like LA County. That just doesn't sound like it's a problem nationwide. If we're talking about 22,000 drug users in the country, hell, for $40 billion, we can send them someplace and let them shoot up and be done with them, That, I think the problem has got to be a lot bigger than that. That number is... and I think that goes to the credibility issue here, because you're not very specific on your numbers, and sometimes they are uncertain. The Netherlands comparison, for instance, I think you're talking about a percentage, but it's not presented as a percentage, and that's confusing. So you need to, I think you've got data here, but the data is not being translated very well as evidence in the presentation, and that, I think, hurts your credibility a bit. Like I said, I think there's an issue about what we spend, whether or not prohibition works, and whether or not we would have more problems in the long run. The one argument that deals with that last point about whether or not we'd have more problems in the long run is the Netherlands comparison that you make. And like I said, the information that you have on that is a little bit ambiguous. So you need some more control over the structure, and definitely you need to be a little bit sharper on the way the evidence is being cited, because it just feels kind of sloppy in the way it's being presented. All right, thank you.